Hi, I'm Lee Weiss, Director of Graduate Programs here at Kaplan Test Prep and also a longtime GRE instructor. And what I'd like to do now is answer a couple of questions that we hear quite often. These are very frequently asked questions from our students and from prospective test takers. So the first question is, how long does it take to prepare for the GRE? And that depends a lot on you and what your strengths are and what your score is. But some averages that we have for international students, students in countries like India and China, tend to prepare 5 to 6 months for the GRE. And part of that may be because English is not their first language and they're trying to build up their vocabulary and their verbal reasoning skills, but it's also just some best practices from that country. In the US, the students who prepare thoroughly for the test tend to practice 2 to 3 months. And to really maximize that time, it's important to note that the GRE is not a good test to cram for. It's not the kind of test where you can pull a couple of all-nighters and get great results. It's really that consistent practice, practicing 4 to 5 days a week for an hour, for 90 minutes, and then mixing in some full-length computer adaptive multi-stage practice tests. That's how you consistently improve your performance. You do some practice, you take a practice test every week or two, you really analyze your performance on that test, you figure out which questions you're getting wrong and why you're getting them wrong, you figure out where your pacing is off, and you really build up your endurance for what it feels like to take a 4-hour exam. And doing all those things, 2 to 3 months of consistent practice, are going to get you your optimal score. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if English is not your first language, if you believe that you have some math deficiencies that need to be built up, or some verbal deficiencies, or some English language deficiencies, it might take you longer. It might take you another month or two of consistent practice in those foundational skills before you're ready to attack the content and strategies necessary to do well in the GRE. So best practices, 2 to 3 months of consistent study, and probably an additional 2 to 3 months of consistent study before that if you need some foundational skills to get up to speed. Second question frequently asked by our students and prospective students is, when is the best time in the admission cycle to take the GRE? And we always recommend that you take the GRE as early as possible in your admission cycle. So if you're applying to graduate schools or business schools and you have an October or a November deadline, we recommend that you apply to, that you take the GRE at least 6 months ahead of time. And you might ask, why not wait till later in the process? Based on your GRE score, you might choose different schools to apply to. You might have been thinking that you would attend a school of average recognition, and you might get a great score, and you might decide, you know what, I think that I can apply to a more selective program. Or vice versa, you might not score as well as you like, and you might need to cast a wider net to make sure that you get into a graduate school or business school. So it's really important that earlier in the process you figure out where your scores are and whether or not you're a competitive applicant to programs. Nearly every graduate school and business school on their website lists the average GRE score for applicants to their program and for those who are accepted, and the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. We always give the advice that you want to be in at least the 50th percentile and wherever possible in the 75th percentile so that you can really be an outstanding candidate to that program. It's not going to only make it easier for you to get accepted, but it's going to make you much more eligible and competitive for things like scholarships, grants, teaching assistantships, fellowships. So following that advice, taking the GRE earlier in your application cycle is going to be much to your advantage. Another thing I would add is, if you're still in college or are a recent graduate, ETS, the maker of the GRE test, has done some research, and it shows that people who are 22 to 23 years of age tend to be the highest scoring age group on the GRE. So there's definitely an advantage to taking it while you're just finishing up college or just out of college. You're really in study mode, you're used to taking a lot of tests. So there is an advantage to taking the test then, and then knowing that your scores are good for 5 years. So you can, in the future, use those scores to apply to graduate school. In addition to that, ETS has recently announced something called ScoreSelect, which goes into effect in July 2012. And essentially it says that anybody who takes the GRE can pick whichever score they want to send to graduate and business programs. They don't need to send all their scores anymore. They can select whichever score is the best and send it. Now, you can't break up math scores and verbal scores or just send essay scores from one test. It sends your total test score, but you can select from multiple tests if you've taken it multiple times and select the best score and have that be the only score that's sent. So we hope this gives you some perspective on these questions, and feel free to reach out to us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/KaplanGradPrep, or on Twitter at www.twitter.com/KaplanGradPrep. And ask us any questions that you have on the GRE, and we'd love to either film them in a future session and share them with all students, and certainly we'll respond back to you right away.